No one saw the ships when they first descended. They didn't cut the skies with fiery trails or announce themselves with thunderous roars. They slipped through the atmosphere like whispers, their hulls camouflaged to reflect the blues and grays of the clouds. It wasn't until the first women vanished that anyone realized Earth had visitors. At first, it was subtle, a jogger in Central Park who never returned home, a botanist in Kenya who disappeared while tending to rare orchids. But soon, the disappearances accelerated. Women from all walks of life, engineers, teachers, nurses, politicians, vanished without a trace. The common thread? All were between the ages of 20 and 40, healthy, and as investigators hesitantly noted, conventionally attractive. The media ran wild with theories. Serial killers, human traffickers, cults, and government conspiracies dominated the news cycles. No one mentioned aliens, not seriously. Until one day, a ship chose to show itself. It hovered over Los Angeles like a malignant star, its surface an iridescent cascade of colors that made the eye ache. The thing was enormous, stretching half a mile across, its edges humming with an eerie rhythmic thrum that seemed to echo in people's bones. And then came the voice. "We require the fertile women of your species. Compliance ensures survival. Resistance guarantees eradication." The message broadcast in every language simultaneously, overriding radio stations, televisions, and even smartphones. It wasn't loud but had an unsettling quality, like it was being spoken directly into the brain by a cold, calculating intelligence. Governments scrambled. Meetings were called. The United Nations convened an emergency summit. But even as leaders debated how to respond, the disappearances continued. Ships began to land, their passengers stepping out into the world. The aliens were beautiful. Too beautiful, in a way that was wrong, uncanny. They stood 7 feet tall, with elongated limbs and pale, smooth skin that shimmered faintly under the light. Their faces were symmetrical to an inhuman degree, with large liquid eyes that seemed to peer straight into a person's soul. Their bodies, clad in sleek organic-looking suits, moved with an unsettling grace, as if gravity itself bent to accommodate them. They called themselves the Yelveth. Angela Martinez never imagined she'd be abducted by aliens. One moment, she was locking up the diner after a long shift, her feet aching and her mind preoccupied with thoughts of overdue bills. The next, she was standing in a room that defied logic. It wasn't a room, not really. It felt vast and intimate at the same time, the walls pulsating with a soft, fleshy light that seemed to breathe. The air smelled faintly of ozone and something sickly sweet. She wasn't alone. Scores of women stood around her, all of them looking equally bewildered and terrified. Before she could speak, the Yelveth appeared. 3 of them. They glided into the space like ghosts, their eyes scanning the crowd with an unnerving hunger. "Welcome, specimens," one of them intoned. Its voice was smooth but devoid of warmth, like silk stretched over steel. "You are the finest your species has to offer. You will serve us well." Angela felt a wave of nausea. "Serve you how?" she demanded, surprising herself with the force of her voice. The Yelveth turned its gaze to her. For a moment, she thought it might answer. Then it smiled. The expression was wrong, too wide, too sharp, like a predator pretending to be kind. It said nothing. The next moments were a blur. The women were herded into separate groups, their cries and protests ignored. Angela was shoved into a cylindrical pod that sealed shut with a hiss. Through the transparent walls, she could see the others in identical pods, their faces pale and terrified. The floor beneath her began to hum. The pod shot upward, Angela's stomach lurching as she was flung into the unknown. Angela woke to find herself in what could only be described as a gilded cage. The room was opulent, filled with shimmering fabrics, strange sculptures, and furniture that seemed to mold itself to her body. It was beautiful, but it wasn't human. A soft chime rang out, and a panel in the wall slid open. A Yelveth entered, its gait fluid and unnervingly quiet. It carried a tray with something that might have been food, though it looked more like gelatinous cubes of light. "Eat," it commanded, placing the tray on a pedestal. Its voice was as smooth and detached as before, but there was something in its eyes that made Angela's skin crawl. "I'm not hungry," she said, her voice trembling despite her efforts to sound defiant. The Yelveth tilted its head. "That is irrelevant. You must be maintained for optimal performance. Compliance will reduce suffering." "Suffering?" Angela repeated. "What the hell do you want from us?" It stared at her for a long moment. Then it spoke a single word, its tone chillingly devoid of emotion. Breeding. Angela's blood ran cold. The Yelveth underestimated one thing: humanity's penchant for rebellion. In their arrogance, they had assumed that a species they deemed inferior would simply submit. But pockets of resistance began to form, even among the women taken aboard their ships. Angela became an unlikely leader, her fiery determination igniting hope among the captives. The resistance was messy, desperate, and fueled by a cocktail of fear and fury. They sabotaged the Yelveth's systems, learned to navigate the labyrinthine corridors of their ships, and communicated through stolen devices. Angela discovered that the Yelveth weren't invincible. They bled, and they could die. But the Yelveth had secrets, too. Dark, unfathomable truths about their purpose, their origins, and why they had come to Earth in the first place. And the women were starting to change. Angela first noticed the changes in Julia, a biochemist who had been abducted weeks before her. Julia had been instrumental in the resistance effort, using her scientific knowledge to decipher the Yelveth's technology. But lately, she'd been acting off. It started with her skin. Subtle at first, an almost imperceptible luminescence under the artificial light. Then, the changes became more pronounced. Her once brown eyes began to glow faintly, a phosphorescent blue that illuminated her face in the dark. She claimed she felt fine, but Angela wasn't convinced. One night, while plotting their next sabotage mission, Angela confronted her. "Julia, what's going on with you?" Angela demanded. "You're glowing like a damn Christmas tree." Julia hesitated, her fingers brushing against her forearm. "I don't know," she admitted. "It started a few days ago. I feel different, stronger, faster, like my body's adapting to something." "Adapting?" Angela echoed. "To what?" Julia shrugged, but there was a shadow in her eyes. "Whatever they're doing to us. Whatever's in the air here, the food, the experiments. I think it's changing us." Angela felt a cold knot of dread tighten in her stomach. "And you're okay with that?" "Of course not." Julia snapped. "But what choice do we have? We can't stop breathing. We can't stop eating. They've designed this entire place to make sure we become whatever it is they want us to be." Angela didn't respond. She couldn't. The truth was too horrifying to articulate. The Yelveth had a chilling efficiency to their operation. The women weren't just prisoners, they were commodities, carefully catalogued and monitored. Angela discovered this when she and a small group of rebels infiltrated one of the breeding chambers. The chamber was a grotesque parody of a nursery. Rows of pods lined the walls, each one containing a woman suspended in a viscous, amber liquid. Their eyes were closed, their bodies eerily still, except for the occasional twitch or shudder. Angela approached one of the pods, her heart pounding. She recognized the woman inside, Chloe, a college student who had gone missing 2 months ago. Chloe's stomach was grotesquely swollen, her skin stretched taut over a mass that pulsed and writhed beneath the surface. "Jesus Christ," one of the rebels muttered, his voice trembling. "They're using them as incubators," Angela whispered, her voice barely audible. "But for what?" As if in answer, one of the pods released a sharp hiss. The amber liquid drained away, and Chloe's body convulsed. Angela stepped back, horrified, as something began to emerge from the woman's stomach. It was small at first, a pale, writhing thing that looked more like a tumor than a living creature. But it grew rapidly, unfurling spindly limbs and a bulbous, translucent head. Its eyes snapped open, and Angela felt a wave of nausea as she stared into their liquid, alien depths. The thing turned its gaze to her, and for a moment, she thought she could hear it. Whispering. Not with words, but with an invasive presence that pressed against her mind like cold fingers. Before she could react, Julia grabbed her arm. "We have to go," she said urgently. "Now." Angela found it darkly ironic how quickly the absurd had become routine. The resistance meetings were now punctuated by gallows humor and surreal observations that no one could have imagined just weeks ago. "You know what I miss?" one woman said during a planning session. "Traffic. Sitting in my car, swearing at people. That was peak human misery." "Peak misery is waking up with tentacles growing out of your back," another muttered, scratching at her glowing skin. "Maybe they just want to make us prettier," Angela quipped, though her voice was bitter. "Aliens are all about aesthetics, right?" The room fell silent. No one laughed. It was a grim joke, but it wasn't entirely unfounded. The Yelveth's obsession with perfection, their fixation on human women as specimens, spoke to a deeper, more sinister purpose. Whatever they were creating, it wasn't just about reproduction. It was about transformation. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, a Yelveth defector. The creature appeared one day in the middle of a resistance meeting, its glowing form shimmering like heat waves. The rebels immediately raised their weapons, but the Yelveth raised its hands in a gesture of surrender. "I am not here to harm you," it said, its voice resonating with a strange musicality. "I am here to help." Angela stepped forward, her eyes narrowing. "Why the hell should we trust you?" "Because I am not like the others. I do not believe in the chain." "The chain?" Julia asked. The Yelveth inclined its head. "The velvet chain. It is what we call the process. It binds you to us, reshapes you into tools for our survival. But the chain is flawed. It consumes too much, destroys too much. Your species is unique, but it will not survive the chain." Angela's mind raced. "What do you mean, tools for your survival? What are you using us for?" "We are dying," the Yelveth admitted. "Our biology has stagnated. We can no longer reproduce. Your species offers the genetic diversity we require to sustain ourselves. But the chain does more than sustain. It transforms. It erases what was and replaces it with us." A heavy silence fell over the room. Angela felt the weight of the alien's words pressing down on her, suffocating. "We're not just breeding stock," she said finally. "You're trying to turn us into you." The Yelveth nodded. "Yes. But it is not too late to resist." The defector's knowledge was invaluable. It revealed weaknesses in the Yelveth's systems, vulnerabilities that the resistance could exploit. Armed with this information, Angela and her team began planning their most ambitious mission yet, to destroy the velvet chain and free the women trapped in its grip. But the Yelveth weren't going to let their prize slip away so easily. The closer the resistance came to success, the more desperate and brutal the aliens became. And all the while, Angela couldn't shake the feeling that the changes in their bodies, the glowing skin, the enhanced strength, the whispers in their minds, were more than just side effects. The chain wasn't just physical. It was mental, spiritual, existential. The women weren't just fighting for their freedom. They were fighting to stay human. The resistance moved under the cover of artificial night. The Yelveth had no true concept of day or darkness. Their ships pulsed with a bioluminescent glow that created a constant twilight. Angela and her team navigated the corridors like ghosts, armed with makeshift weapons, salvage tools, shards of alien material, and their own bodies, which now possessed unnatural strength thanks to the Yelveth's meddling. Julia led the way, her glowing eyes scanning for traps. The Yelveth defector, who had named itself Vexen, floated alongside them, its movements unervingly silent. It claimed the central hub of the Velvet Chain's machinery was located in the core nexus, a chamber deep within the ship where the Yelveth harvested and manipulated the genetic material of their captives. "The nexus is heavily guarded," Vexen warned. "But the chain can be severed. If you destroy the central node, the transformation process will collapse. The captives will return to their original forms." "Assuming we live long enough to pull it off," Angela muttered. "Do not underestimate yourselves," Vexen said. "You are stronger than you realize. The chain has already begun to evolve you. Use it. Turn their weapon against them." Angela didn't reply. She hated the idea that the changes in their bodies, the glowing veins, the heightened reflexes, the strange voices that whispered at the edges of their minds, might be an advantage. Every time she used her new strength, she felt as though she were giving a piece of herself away. The Nexus was a nightmare of organic and mechanical fusion. Vast, pulsating tendrils stretched across the chamber like veins, glowing with a sickly green light. In the center, a massive, throbbing structure dominated the space, resembling a heart made of crystalline fibers and flesh. It pulsed rhythmically, emitting a low resonant hum that made Angela's teeth ache. "Jesus," one of the rebels whispered. "This is it." "This is it," Angela confirmed, her grip tightening on her weapon. "All right. Julia, Vexen, get to the control panel. The rest of us will." Before she could finish, an ear-splitting screech filled the chamber. The tendrils writhed violently, and a dozen Yelveth poured into the room, their elongated limbs gleaming under the green light. "Intruders," one of them hissed. Its voice echoed in their minds like nails on glass. You cannot stop the chain. It is eternal. Guess we'll see about that, Angela snapped. The fight that followed was pure chaos. The Yelveth moved with inhuman speed, their limbs blurring as they attacked. But the rebels fought with a desperation that the aliens couldn't match. Angela hurled herself into the fray, her enhanced strength allowing her to crush a Yelveth's skull with a single swing. Around her, the others fought like demons, their glowing bodies a surreal contrast to the blood and carnage. Meanwhile, Julia and Vexen worked feverishly at the control panel. Julia's fingers flew over the alien interface, her bioluminescent eyes glowing brighter as she deciphered the system. Almost there, she shouted. Just keep them off us. Angela barely had time to react as a Yelveth lunged at her. She dodged its attack and drove her makeshift blade into its chest. The creature let out a choked gasp before collapsing, its body twitching. Behind her, the Nexus began to pulse erratically. The hum grew louder, the light brighter. Julia, what's happening? Angela shouted. I'm destabilizing it. Julia yelled back. One more minute. We don't have a minute. The Nexus exploded in a blinding flash of light. Angela felt herself lifted off her feet and thrown backward, her ears ringing and her vision swimming. When she finally opened her eyes, the chamber was a wreck. The tendrils had gone limp, their sickly glow extinguished. The crystalline heart had shattered into a million fragments, which glowed faintly before fading into nothingness. The surviving Yelveth writhed on the ground, their bodies convulsing as if in agony. Angela staggered to her feet, her body aching, and looked around for Julia. She found her slumped against the control panel, blood trickling from her nose. Her glowing eyes were dim but still open. Did we? Angela began. Julia gave a weak smile. We did it. The chain's broken. Vexen approached, its form flickering like a dying flame. You have succeeded, it said. The transformation process has been undone. The captives will return to their original state. But you are beyond the point of reversal. The chain has taken root in you. Angela froze. What the hell are you talking about? You are no longer fully human, Vexen said. You are something in between. A bridge between our species. You will continue to evolve. It cannot be stopped. Angela stared at it, her mind reeling. What are you saying? That we're stuck like this? Yes. But you are also free. You have severed the chain. The Yelveth will not recover from this. Julia let out a bitter laugh. Free. Sure. Free to glow in the dark and hear creepy alien whispers for the rest of our lives. Angela felt a pang of anger, but she pushed it down. There was no time for self-pity. We'll deal with that later, she said firmly. Right now, we need to get off this ship. As the resistance fled the crumbling ship, Angela couldn't shake the Yelveth's final words. You will continue to evolve. It cannot be stopped. What did that mean for them? For her? Would she become something like Vexen? Something worse? The thought gnawed at her as they commandeered an escape pod and launched toward Earth. The planet glimmered below them, beautiful and fragile. But even as they descended, Angela knew the fight wasn't over. The Yelveth might have been defeated, but the changes they had wrought on humanity were permanent. And whatever Angela and the others were becoming, it wasn't human. Not entirely. The escape pod breached Earth's atmosphere in a searing blaze, its heat shields glowing white-hot as it streaked across the sky. Inside, Angela and the others braced themselves, their bodies aching from the mission and the transformations they could no longer ignore. When the pod finally crashed into a barren stretch of desert, the silence that followed was deafening. The rebels stumbled out, coughing and gasping, their bodies weak but alive. Angela shielded her eyes from a harsh sunlight, the familiar sensation of gravity pulling at her limbs like an old, uncomfortable coat. Where are we? Julia rasped, her voice hoarse. Angela scanned the horizon. The desert stretched endlessly in every direction, the sun a blinding orb overhead. I don't know, she admitted. But we're home. That's what matters. The group began to take stock of their supplies, but Angela couldn't shake the gnawing unease in her gut. The mission had succeeded, the velvet chain was broken, the Yelveth defeated. So why did it feel like their nightmare was just beginning? The first sign of trouble appeared the next morning. Angela woke to find her skin crawling, literally. Tiny luminous veins pulsed just beneath the surface, branching out like roots across her forearm. The sensation wasn't painful, but it was deeply unsettling. "Angela," Julia whispered, her voice tight with fear. "You need to see this." Angela turned to find Julia standing by a small makeshift mirror they'd scavenged from the pod. Her reflection was horrifying. The glow in her eyes had intensified, spreading outward like cracks in porcelain. Her skin shimmered faintly, almost metallic, and her hair, once dark and thick, had taken on a strange silvery sheen. "It's accelerating," Julia said, her own reflection showing similar changes. "Whatever they did to us, it's not stopping. It's spreading." Angela clenched her fists, her mind racing. "Turn their weapon against them." Vexen's words echoed in her head, but they felt more like a curse now. What kind of weapon had they become? News of their return spread faster than they could have imagined. The crash site was discovered within hours, and soon the desert was swarming with government agents, scientists, and reporters. Angela and the others were taken into custody, whisked away to a secure facility where they were prodded, questioned, and tested. The world was desperate for answers. The Yelveth's invasion had left a scar on humanity, and the survivors were the only ones who could explain what had happened. But Angela wasn't sure she had the answers they wanted. Every time she tried to recount the events aboard the ship, the memories felt slippery, fragmented. It was as though her mind were rewriting itself, erasing the old Angela and replacing her with something alien. The scientists were fascinated by the changes in their bodies. "You're evolving," one of them marveled, his eyes gleaming with academic curiosity. "It's unprecedented. Your biology is adapting in ways we've never seen. You're faster, stronger, more resilient." "I'm not a goddamn lab rat," Angela snapped, yanking her arm away from his grasp. "Of course not," he said smoothly. But the hunger in his gaze told her otherwise. The voices started the following week. Angela was sitting alone in her cell when she heard them, a faint, insistent murmur at the edge of her consciousness. At first, she thought it was her imagination, a side effect of the stress and the transformations. But the voices grew louder, more distinct. They weren't human. "Angela," they whispered. "Angela, you are one of us." She clamped her hands over her ears, but it didn't help. The voices weren't coming from outside. They were inside her mind, crawling through the synapses like worms. "Leave me alone," she hissed, her voice trembling. "You cannot escape what you are," the voices said. "The chain is broken, but the seed remains. You will become more than human. You will become us." Angela wasn't the only one hearing the voices. Julia and the others admitted they'd been experiencing the same phenomenon, though each heard something slightly different. Some claimed the voices offered guidance, others said they felt like threats. A few had started speaking in languages they'd never known. "We're connected," Julia said one night, her voice low. "Like a hive mind. The Yelveth were using the chain to link us together, to turn us into, I don't know, an extension of themselves." Angela shuddered. "And now that the chain is gone." Julia hesitated. "Now, we're something else. Something they didn't plan for." "What if it's worse?" one of the others whispered. "What if we're just ticking time bombs?" Angela didn't have an answer. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that whatever they were becoming, it wasn't human, and it wasn't entirely under their control. When the facility went into lockdown, Angela knew their time had run out. The scientists had become increasingly aggressive in their experiments, desperate to uncover the secrets of the Yelveth's technology. Angela and the others were no longer just survivors, they were subjects. "They're never going to let us go," Julia said, her voice grim. "We're too valuable." "Then we don't give them a choice," Angela replied. The plan was reckless, but it was their only option. Using their enhanced strength and speed, they overpowered the guards and fought their way out of the facility. The escape was brutal and chaotic, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. By the time they emerged into the open air, bloodied and gasping, the world was already beginning to change. The changes weren't confined to Angela and the other survivors. Across the globe, women who had been exposed to the Yelveth's technology began to exhibit similar transformations. The mutations were unpredictable, some subtle, others dramatic, but all carried the same underlying truth. Humanity was evolving. Some hailed it as a miracle, a leap forward in the species' development. Others saw it as an abomination, a corruption of everything that made humanity human. The world teetered on the brink of chaos, torn between awe and fear. Angela and the others became symbols of this new era, whether they wanted to or not. But as the mutations continued to spread, one question loomed above all others. What were they becoming, and would there be anything human left when the transformation was complete? Angela's group wasn't just surviving, they were growing. As word of their escape spread, other women who had begun experiencing changes sought them out. They came in secret, slipping away from families, hospitals, or government monitoring stations. Some arrived broken and afraid, others came angry, driven by a burning desire to control what was happening to their bodies. The rebel camp became both a sanctuary and a laboratory, as the women pooled their resources and knowledge to understand the transformations. But with every discovery came tension. The changes weren't uniform. Some women gained enhanced physical abilities, others developed psychic-like sensitivities, and a few exhibited terrifying, uncontrollable powers that left destruction in their wake. It's not just evolution, Julia said during a heated meeting. It's divergence. We're becoming something fragmented. Some of us are gaining abilities that don't even make sense biologically. Angela leaned forward, her voice sharp. What are you saying? Julia hesitated, then glanced at one of the newer arrivals. A woman named Hannah stood in the corner, her back turned. Her hair was white, her skin a soft silver sheen. She hadn't spoken since she arrived, but whenever she moved, objects around her seemed to ripple, bending slightly toward her like metal to a magnet. I'm saying, Julia said carefully, we're not becoming one thing. We're becoming many things. And some of them are dangerous. It was Hannah who delivered the first real warning. One night, Angela found her standing outside the camp, her eyes glowing faintly as she stared at the sky. They're not done with us, Hannah whispered. Angela frowned. Who? Hannah turned her head slowly, her movements unnaturally fluid. The Yelveth. Or, what's left of them. They're calling to us. Reaching through the chain. Angela stiffened. That's impossible. We destroyed the chain. Not all of it, Hannah said. They're still out there, Angela. And they're afraid. Afraid of what we're becoming. Angela felt a chill creep up her spine. Why would they be afraid? Hannah's lips curved into a faint, unsettling smile. Because we're more than they ever imagined. We're not just evolving. We're surpassing them. As the changes spread, the world's response fractured along ideological lines. Some saw the transformations as a gift, a chance for humanity to transcend its limitations. Others viewed it as a plague, an existential threat that needed to be eradicated. And then there were those who worshipped it. They called themselves the Velvet Prophets, a shadowy group that believed the Yelveth's invasion was divine intervention. They began recruiting women who had been altered, promising them salvation and purpose in the next stage of evolution. Angela first encountered the prophets when they attacked one of the rebel safe houses. The assault was brutal and bizarre. Men and women, both human and mutated, fought with a fervor that bordered on madness. Their leader, a woman named Lila, radiated an unnatural charisma that made it almost impossible to look away. We are the chosen. Lila proclaimed during the attack, her voice amplified by some unseen force. You fight against the inevitable, but the velvet chain cannot be broken. It is the will of the universe. Angela barely escaped with her life. But the prophets left behind a chilling message: join us, or be consumed. Reality itself began to feel unstable. Angela started noticing the edges of things bending, as if space was fraying like old fabric. Julia reported seeing flashes of other places when she closed her eyes, alien landscapes that felt too vivid to be dreams. One of the women, Carmen, claimed she could hear the voices of the Yelveth more clearly now, as if they were growing louder. They're watching us, Carmen said one night, her voice trembling. Not just from space, but from everywhere. I can feel them, like they're inside me. Angela stared at her, unease growing in her chest. What do they want? Carmen's face twisted into a grimace. They don't know. They're scared of us, Angela. They think we're unstable. A mistake. Angela's mind reeled. If the Yelveth were afraid, what did that make her and the others? Weapons? Monsters? Or something even they couldn't comprehend? The first full transformation happened without warning. One of the younger women, barely 22, collapsed during a routine training session. Her body convulsed violently, her screams echoing through the camp. By the time Angela arrived, It was too late. The woman's body had split open like a chrysalis, revealing something that was no longer human. Her skin was a translucent blue, her eyes enormous and reflective. Her limbs had elongated, and strange feather-like structures extended from her back. "Please," the creature whispered, her voice barely recognizable. "Help me." Angela approached cautiously. "You're still, you." The creature nodded, tears streaming down her alien face. "It hurts. It's too much. I can't." Before she could finish, her body dissolved into a cloud of shimmering particles. The camp fell silent as the particles floated upward, disappearing into the night sky. Angela stared after them, her heart pounding. Whatever was happening, it was accelerating, and it wasn't something they could control. The whispers became deafening. Angela couldn't sleep without hearing fragments of alien thoughts, disjointed images of places she'd never seen. Julia's powers continued to grow, and Hannah's presence became almost unbearable. The air around her seemed to bend, warping reality itself. The women of the camp began to splinter. Some embraced their transformations, eager to push the limits of their abilities. Others grew fearful, isolating themselves as the changes consumed them. Angela knew they were approaching a breaking point. The Yelveth were still out there, watching, waiting. The Velvet Prophets were growing bolder, their influence spreading across the globe. And whatever was happening to the transformed women was spiraling out of control. But one question loomed above all else, haunting Angela's every waking moment. What happens when the transformation is complete? The nightmares began the night Angela saw the transformed woman dissolve into the sky. Every time she closed her eyes, she was back on the Yelveth ship, standing before the pulsating nexus. Except this time, it wasn't broken. It was alive, writhing and glowing with impossible colors. Tendrils reached out to her, wrapping around her limbs, her throat, her mind. And then she heard it, the voice of the chain. "You think you are free, but you are still bound." Angela woke in a cold sweat, her body shaking. But the voice didn't leave her. It echoed in her thoughts, growing louder with each passing day. Julia burst into Angela's quarters one morning, her face pale and her eyes wild. "We have a problem." Angela sat up, groggy and irritated. "We've had problems since the moment we got back." "It's Carmen," Julia said. "She's gone." Angela's heart sank. Carmen had been one of their strongest allies, despite her unnerving connection to the Yelveth's whispers. "Gone how?" "Walked out of camp in the middle of the night," Julia replied. She said, she heard them calling her. She said she had to go. "Angela quoi?" "Angela, there's more." Julia hesitated. She's not the only one. 4 others left with her. All of them said the same thing: the Yelveth are calling. The desert was unforgiving, but Angela and a small group of rebels tracked the missing women through the barren landscape. The heat was oppressive, the air shimmering like liquid glass. By the second day, tempers began to flare. "This is a waste of time," one of the rebels muttered. "If they want to go back to the Yelveth, let them. They're probably better off." Angela rounded on him, her voice sharp. "Better off being enslaved? Or worse, transformed into whatever this is?" She gestured to her glowing arms, the faintly shimmering veins that marked all of them now. The rebel fell silent, but Angela could feel the unease spreading through the group. They were all asking the same question, even if no one dared voice it. What if this is where we're headed to? The Velvet Prophets attacked on the 3rd night. Angela had set up a makeshift camp, the group huddling around a small fire for warmth. The first sign of trouble was a faint hum in the air, like the low drone of cicadas. Then the ground erupted. Lila emerged from the chaos, her silver hair gleaming under the moonlight. Her presence was magnetic, her movements smooth and predatory. "Angela," she purred, her voice dripping with false warmth. "I've been looking for you." Angela raised her weapon. "You're wasting your time." Lila laughed. "Am I? Look around you. The chain is gone, but you're still tethered to it. You feel it, don't you? The pull? The hunger? You're fighting a war against yourselves, and you're losing." Angela fired, the shot aimed directly at Lila's chest. But the bullet never hit. It stopped midair, quivering, before dissolving into a cloud of sparkling dust. "Tisk tisk," Lila said, wagging a finger. "You can't kill what's already transcended." The prophets didn't kill Angela or her group. Instead, they made them an offer. "Join us," Lila said, her voice echoing in the stillness. "We're not your enemy. We're your future. The Yelveth gave us a gift, Angela. They broke us open, showed us what we could become." Angela stared at her, disgust curling in her gut. "They didn't give us a gift. They tried to destroy us. And yet here we are," Lila replied. "Stronger. Evolved. Free." "Free?" Angela scoffed. "You call this free? They're still pulling the strings. You're just too blind to see it." Lila smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Think about it. The Yelveth fear us now. They know we've surpassed them. But only if we embrace what we are. Fight it, and you'll tear yourselves apart." Angela didn't answer. She couldn't. Because deep down, she knew Lila was right about one thing. The fight wasn't just against the Yelveth. It was against themselves. That night, Angela had another dream, or maybe it wasn't a dream at all. She was standing on an endless plain, the ground a shimmering, liquid silver. The sky was alive with shifting constellations, the stars forming and reforming into alien symbols she couldn't understand. And then the Nexus appeared. It rose from the ground like a living thing, its crystalline structure glinting in the starlight. Tendrils reached out to her, pulsing with light. "You cannot escape us," the Nexus said, its voice filling her mind. "You are the chain now." Angela fell to her knees, clutching her head. "I'm not yours," she whispered. "I'll never be yours." The Nexus pulsed, and she felt its tendrils tighten around her thoughts. "You will see. You will understand. You are more than human now. You are more than Yelveth. You are the bridge." Angela woke with a start, her body drenched in sweat. The words echoed in her mind, leaving her trembling. She didn't know what the Nexus meant, but one thing was clear. The fight wasn't over. And it wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about transformation. By the time Angela and her group caught up with Carmen and the others, it was too late. They found them standing in the middle of a desolate canyon, their bodies glowing faintly, their faces serene. "We're going to them," Carmen said when Angela approached. Her voice was calm, almost hypnotic. "They're waiting for us." Angela stepped forward, her fists clenched. "Carmen, listen to me. They don't want to help you. They want to use you." Carmen shook her head. "No. They're afraid of us. But they also need us. And we need them." The canyon began to hum, the air vibrating with an otherworldly energy. Angela looked up and saw it, a Yelveth ship, descending slowly, its surface shimmering with colors that made her eyes ache. Carmen turned to Angela, her glowing eyes full of something that might have been pity. "You can't stop this, Angela. You can't stop what we're becoming." Angela's heart pounded as she watched the ship descend. She knew she had a choice to make. She could fight, as she always had, or she could step into the unknown and face whatever waited on the other side of the transformation. Angela stood at the threshold of inevitability. The Yelveth ship loomed above, its surface shifting like a living oil slick, rippling with patterns that teased the edges of comprehension. Carmen and the others, their glowing forms now eerily serene, stepped forward in unison, as though drawn by. "Don't do this!" Angela shouted, her voice breaking the silence. She felt powerless, watching as the people she had fought so hard to save surrendered themselves to the same force they had vowed to escape. But Carmen turned back one last time, her expression soft, almost loving. "This isn't surrender," she said. Angela clenched her fists, torn between instinct and reason. She had spent months fighting against the Yelveth, against the chain, against the very changes that had begun to consume her. But in that moment, she realized, the fight was never against them. It was against fear. Before she could stop herself. "Angela, what are you doing?" Julia's voice was sharp, panicked. Angela glanced back at her, a bittersweet smile tugging at her lips. "I need to know." The ship's interior was unlike anything Angela had seen before. It was alive, a shifting labyrinth of light and shadow that seemed to pulse in time with her heartbeat. She felt it immediately, the chain, or what was left of it. It wasn't a prison anymore, it was a thread, delicate yet unbreakable, binding her to something vast and ancient. The Yelveth were there, but they weren't the beings she remembered. Their forms were fractured, incomplete, their bodies flickering like ghosts caught between worlds. They watched her with a mix of fear and awe. "You have come," one of them said, its voice a tremor that resonated through her bones. Angela stepped forward, unafraid. "Why did you call us?" "Because we cannot contain what you are," the Yelveth replied. "The chain was meant to control, to reshape, but it has become something beyond our design. You are not bound. You are free." Angela stared at them, the weight of their words settling over her. "And you're afraid of that?" "Yes." She laughed bitterly. "You tried to make us into you, but instead, we've become something more." "You are the bridge," the Yelveth said, "between what was and what will be. You will decide the future, not just of your kind, but of ours." Angela felt a strange calm wash over her. The fear that had driven her for so long was gone, replaced by something deeper, understanding. Angela turned to Carmen and the others, who stood in silence, their glowing forms blending with the ship's light. "This isn't about fighting them anymore," she said. "It's about deciding who we want to be. And what if we don't want this?" Julia's voice cut through the stillness, trembling with anger and fear. "What if we just want to go back to the way things were?" Angela looked at her, her heart aching. "We can't go back, Julia. But that doesn't mean we lose who we are. We get to choose what happens next." Julia stared at her for a long moment, then nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "Then let's make it count." The Yelveth ship began to change, its walls dissolving into streams of light that wove themselves around the group. Angela felt the chain stir within her, not as a prison, but as a connection, a thread linking her to every other being in the room, human and Yelveth alike. The transformation wasn't physical, not entirely. It was a breaking open, a shedding of boundaries. Angela saw herself as she truly was, flawed, fierce, and infinite. She saw the Yelveth for what they were, creatures of desperation and beauty, clinging to survival in a universe that had outgrown them. And she saw the future, not as a fixed path, but as a series of choices, each one branching into countless possibilities. The ship released them in a blaze of light, depositing them gently back on the desert floor. The sky above was clear, the stars brighter than Angela had ever seen. Around her, the others were silent, their faces etched with wonder and resolve. Julia approached her, her expression unreadable. "What now?" she asked. Angela looked at the horizon, the first rays of dawn breaking through tea. The changes in their bodies hadn't stopped, but they no longer felt alien. They were tools, gifts that could shape the world instead of breaking it. And for the first time, Angela felt at peace with W. The Yelveth were gone, their ships disappearing into the stars. But their legacy remained, not as a curse, but as a challenge, a reminder that evolution wasn't about control. As the sun rose, Angela turned to her group, a quiet determination in her eyes. "This isn't the end," she said. "It's just the beg." And together, they stepped into